Good morning, all. I will wait a few more moments before we get started. All right, Ms. Cott, are you ready for us to go on the record?
Good morning, all set.
Thank you. Good morning. It is October 10th. I'm Nicole Kinsey, presiding hearing officer for the Administrative Hearings Office of the State Water Resources Control Board. This is the hearing on the pending petition for assignment of state filed application 25517 and accompanying water right application 25517X01 and the pending request for release from priority of state filed applications 25513, 25514, the unassigned portion of 25517, 22235, 23780, and 23781 in favor of water right application 25517X01 of Sites Project Authority. We are conducting this hearing by Zoom today, and we are also broadcasting the hearing live on the AHO YouTube channel. Both the audio and video of this hearing are being recorded. We will post files of the recording in the FTP folder for this proceeding. The YouTube recording will also be available on the AHO YouTube webpage. As usual, if at any time you're experiencing technical difficulties trying to communicate with us or join the Zoom platform, please send an email to the site's email inbox at sites-wr-application@waterboards.ca.gov. We will take breaks today as usual, as well as a lunch break and then a hard stop. I suspect we will end before 5 p.m. today, but at least by 5 p.m. We will not have Ms. Mullen assisting us today. Instead, we will have Mr. Woldridge assisting us. So if you do, and I think, if we forget, Mr. Woldridge will still respond to the wrong address here. But if you are a witness or an attorney today, please feel free to address Mr. Woldridge directly, and he will be bringing up those exhibits or forwarding slides as needed. With that, I don't think where we left off was with Mr. Asarian's cross-examination yesterday. We were in the middle of that, so that's where I intend to pick up. And then my understanding is we will hear from Mr. King. But I don't think I have any additional. And then I wanted to talk about how we're going to handle.
Sorry, Ms. Kenzie, you're frozen for me.
This morning. I don't think I have anything on.
Ms. Kenzie, you froze for me for
Oh,
a good 30 seconds. I don't know if that was just me.
I
So,
don't know either.
so
Where
I
did
wanted
I end with you?
I wanted to talk about how we're going to handle, and then you froze.
Oh, okay. How we're going to handle evidentiary objections. And we will talk about that after we hear from our witnesses today. And then with that, I think I meant to look to the room to see if there are any other procedural issues we should talk about because I don't have anything on my list. Hearing none, I think I will look to see. I see we have Mr. Asarian with us, and we have Mr. Ferguson, and we have Mr. Mooney. I assume that's the correct assembly for this morning, as far as we know. All right.
I believe so.
Okay, great. I will ask my team to pin us all up. And then this morning, I can now say accurately, Mr. Asarian, do you recall taking the oath yesterday when you were, with respect to your testimony in this proceeding?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. And with that, I will turn things over to Mr. Ferguson. Do you have additional questions for Mr. Asarian?
I do have a few more questions. Thank you. Mr. Asarian, yesterday afternoon, when we ended, I was in the middle of asking you a few questions about your opinions related to deficit irrigation. Do you recall that?
I remember talking about reducing consumptive use and saving water. I don't remember specifically that we closed with deficit irrigation at the very end, but that general topic, yes.
Fair enough. Why you identified regulated deficit irrigation is one way to manage consumptive use, correct?
Yes.
And I believe I asked you whether you had experience working directly with irrigators and advising them on their irrigation practices. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And you indicated that you didn't have any direct on-farm experience. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's correct. I don't have any on-farm experience, but I would like to elaborate on that if I could.
Please.
Yes. So, I mean, my general philosophy in life is that there's more than one way to learn something. And, you know, I spent my lifetime learning in lots of different capacities. You know, for the last several years, I've been working pretty intensively on a project in the Shasta and Scott valleys of the Klamath Basin, looking at agricultural water use there and trying to understand the response of the irrigators there to irrigation curtailment regulations. I've been primarily using satellite remote sensing. So as part of that, I'm working on a manuscript to submit to a peer review journal, and I submitted a technical report, you know, as part of water board hearings and other things like that. I've gone to a lot of public meetings. I've talked to farmers, you know, at the meetings and had follow-up conversations with them to, you know, better understand their practices and how it might affect the watershed hydrology. I went to a national conference on evapotranspiration where I talked with farmers there, talked with other people who advise farmers, and so my perspective on this whole thing is a watershed hydrology perspective, but I try to understand it from as many different ways as I can and talk to as many different people about that. So.
Okay. Who are you working for in the Shasta and Scott Valley in the role that you just described?
In the Shasta and Scott Valley, I'm working for what's called the Klamath Tribal Water Quality Consortium, which is the environmental departments of the Yurok, Karuk, Hupa, Quartz Valley, and Bolikla tribes.
Okay. Can I just ask more specifically? So in that experience, have you engaged directly with irrigators in those valleys and just discuss with them their irrigation practices?
Yes, I have.
Okay. And in that role, have you served as an advisor to them and in their irrigation practices?
No, not advising them. More, I would say, I would characterize it as trying to better understand their operations so that I could we're sort of all collectively trying to come up with ways to, you know, keep farmers farming but get more water in the river. So brainstorming ideas on how we can, you know, make things better in that regard. So I'm not advising them, but I'm trying to you know, understand their practices and advise yeah, kind of lost my train of thought there, but I think that's most of what I want to say. So I wouldn't say they're looking to me for advice, but we're having interesting conversations. Both learning.
So do you have an understanding of the incentives or disincentives that motivate irrigators to undertake certain irrigation practices?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I have a special expertise in that, but I've spent a good amount of time thinking and reading and talking to people about that. Yeah.
So from those discussions, have you gained an understanding that economic incentives play a role in irrigation practices?
Yes.
And with respect to economics, water use generally has a cost associated with it, correct?
Yes, although that cost, you know, varies widely depending on, you know, if they're pumping up water from 500 feet below ground or if they're turning on a ditch that's gravity fed. for that kind of stuff.
Have you generally gained an understanding of how the cost of water and how the cost of using water may modify those irrigation practices?
Yes.
So is it likely that as water use is your understanding that these irrigators try to manage the water in a way that limits their cost to the greatest extent possible while still producing a crop?
Yes, my understanding would be that not just limiting their costs, but balancing the costs and benefits.
Okay.
But that's not the only factor that governs what they do. But certainly, it's obviously they're in a business, so they're considering the business heavily.
So it makes sense to you that they're since water has a cost associated with it, that they would use as little water as possible that would still allow them to achieve the greatest amount of production, correct?
Can you just rephrase that? I think I agree with you, but just want to hear it again.
Well, is it your do you hold the opinion and belief that irrigators are likely to use as little water as possible while still being able to attain the highest production possible with the littlest amount of water?
I would say generally, yes, I think, but there's a balance in that getting the absolute possible highest yield and using the lowest possible amount of water takes attention and work, and you got to be out there, like making sure that everything is going, how you want it. You got to be like fixing leaks and making sure the crops are happy and have the right fertilizers or pesticides or whatever it is. So you got to balance also all the other inputs and labor and machines and fuel, and so it's a big balancing act, really. But yeah, as a general principle, all other things being equal, yeah, they would try to minimize costs and maximize production. But water is not the only cost.
And you have no reason to believe that the irrigators in the Sacramento Valley that would receive sites water aren't attentive to all those details that you just described in terms of water and crop management issues, correct?
I see no reason why they wouldn't be paying attention to costs. They're in a business, so.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I would like to turn back to your testimony, and that's WCT3. Well, let me ask you, while we bring that up, one more question about deficit irrigation.
Yeah.
You haven't conducted any analyses of the extent to which irrigators in the Sacramento Valley are using deficit irrigation, have you?
I have not conducted any of my own personal analyses on that. No.
Okay, thank you. All right, can we turn to page?
I guess the only thing I would say on that, yeah, I mean, I've read some literature that said there's a very wide range in the amount of water that people apply, and that wide range in consumptive use, even among the same crops around the valley. So that, to me, I guess would sort of imply that there is differences in deficit irrigation or not, but I haven't specifically looked at it myself.
Okay. So on page 12, at lines 11 through 16, you mentioned you could not find any evidence in the record, at least in the EIR files, I guess, regarding evaporation from the site's reservoir. Is that correct?
I could not find an annual volume, which is the most relevant from my perspective.
Okay.
Like I explained in my testimony, it was clear that the authority and their consultants had, accounted for evaporation in their water budget, but they just hadn't presented it to the public and decision makers.
Okay.
So I was able to, calculate it from the bits and pieces that were in there. I'm happy to explain that if you'd like.
Well, I just wanted to ask you a few more questions about the availability issue. You're appearing here on behalf of the Water Climate Trust.
Yes.
And so you work with Mr. Fisher?
Yeah, this is the first project that I've worked with him on.
Okay. So he didn't share with you any of the information that was provided to him in February 2023 about evaporation?
I'm pretty sure not, unless you show me something and I look at it and like, oh yeah, that looks familiar.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to do that. If we could just real quickly bring up the email I sent over this morning, that'd be helpful. To your staff, Ms. Kinsey.
Yes, no, I understand. We have it. Just might take a moment.
Okay.
And I believe this will be sites 290, if my
That's right.
math is correct here. Do you happen to have the file name? I know I've seen it, but it's the Mr. Ferguson that you sent.
I'm looking.
Actually.
January 2023 water rights submittal for NGOs.
Does this look right?
Yes. Thank you very much. All right. So this is going to be sites 290. Mr. Asarian, this is an email that Ms. Alicia Forsyth, who's a staff person for the authority, sent to a group of NGO representatives after one of the meetings that we had last February 23rd, 2023. And as you can see, one of the recipients of the email is Mr. Fisher up in the two
Yes,
box.
I see it says Conrad. Oh yeah, Conrad and Conrad Fisher. Yes, I see that.
Great. If we can scroll down real quickly, I'd appreciate it. And you see item 4 there, right in the middle of the first page. Does that?
I'm sorry, what is the context of what this is the email that's saying, here, we're providing you this information and here's what this information is. Is that the overall context?
Yeah, so do you see that Ms. Forsyth under number 4, and then with the additional text there titled seepage, evaporation, and conveyance losses, was providing a group of NGOs with information about evaporation and where to find that in the EIR?
Yes.
Okay, so it appears that as of February 2023, Water Climate Trust had this information, correct?
Wasn't the final EIR, I thought it was like 2022 or something like that.
No, November 2023 is when I should be asking the questions, not giving you the answers.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. So anyhow, it appears that Mr. Fisher had this information as of February 2023, correct?
That's what this email would suggest.
Okay. And this email suggests that information appears in what's called Master Response 3 to the EIR, correct?
That's what it says.
Okay, so you haven't reviewed Master Response 3, doesn't sound like, is that correct?
I haven't. I was looking at the EIS documents that were in the EIS folder from the AHO FTP site. There was a whole folder of like FEIR, FEIS, and that's what I focused my search on.
And so you didn't see AHO 244 in that of exhibits, it
I
sounds
don't
like.
think so, unless it was
Okay.
I was just going to, I think I can look pretty closely in my files here. Yeah. Yep. No, I don't think so. That would not be part of volume 1 chapters or volume 2 appendices.
Hmm.
I don't think.
Okay, well, we can move on.
I
So
see it says 10 for, sorry, go ahead.
can we go ahead and bring up AHO 244? I just want to ask you a few questions about the authority's estimate.
Okay.
And if we can go to page MR3-7. And scroll down. All right, under the heading seepage, evaporation, and conveyance losses, Mr. Asarian, do you see that the authority estimated evaporative losses of 27,000 acre feet on an average annual basis?
Yes. I assume that, let's see. Is that for sites reservoir or is that for other reservoirs and calcium too? It says net loss to evaporation in its reservoirs. But that amount is small enough that it can't be like all the reservoirs in calcium.
This document reflects an analysis of sites reservoir.
Okay.
So I'm asking you whether it appears that the calcium 2 analysis found net evaporative losses of 27,000 feet per year.
That is what it appears to show here if the reservoir is indeed sites, which I can't tell from what I'm looking at here, but seems reasonable if that's what you're representing it as.
Okay. And your estimate for evaporation was 44 to 48,000. Is that correct? Acre
Yes.
feet per year?
Yes.
Okay. I think during your deck presentation yesterday, you mentioned that the estimate you obtained was quite a bit higher than other reservoirs, is that accurate?
Yes, quite a bit higher than most other large reservoirs in California.
Okay, so which other reservoirs did you have in mind when you made that statement?
I have done an analysis of I attempted to do an analysis of the 10 largest reservoirs in California, including the proposed sites. So, from sites, I use the estimates that I derived from assembling that information from the EIS, as I described in my testimony. The other 9 reservoirs, San Luis Reservoir is kind of a weird one because they're constantly like pumping water in and out for pumped hydro storage, I think. And so I just skipped that one. So I did the other 8 largest ones that are listed in the we got a list of the 10 largest reservoirs, including sites from the sites. It's a sites overview presentation. It's like 15 slides. I'm happy to share the link with that. It's sites-overview-english.pdf from the site's website. So they are Shasta, Oroville, Trinity, New Melones, Don Pedro, Berryessa, Almanor, and Folsom.
Is there one of those, is one of those reservoirs most analogous to the proposed site's reservoir, at least with respect to the variables you believe are important for evaluating evaporation?
The only thing that for this analysis that I characterized the reservoirs by was their just their total inflow, or their average inflow, and their total capacity. Those top 10 rankings were based on total capacity. I did not attempt to try to ascertain which one I thought sites would be most closely similar to, because that would require looking at things like I guess technically called the morphometry of the reservoir, like what is the average depth, and what also things like the elevation and the climate. And so there's I didn't attempt to match it to that. I was more comparing sites to sort of the population of the eight other largest reservoirs in California that I could get data for.
So when you said that the estimate you obtained was higher than these reservoirs, what number are you using to reach that conclusion?
Yeah, so just as I can give you every single number, but to characterize.
Sorry, I just mean more generally. Like, are you using volume, average annual evaporation?
Yes, I'm calculating average annual evaporation as a percent of average annual reservoir inflow. So of the water that comes into the reservoir, what percent is evaporated? Long-term average is like 40-year average.
So what number did you use, for example, for San Luis Reservoir in terms of the inflow?
So my maybe I should talk briefly about the methods that I use. So for inflow, I got information from the California Nevada River Forecast Center. It's a NOAA, that's part of the NOAA climate people or organization. So they have on their website, they have a little map where you can click around, and they have different points around the state. And so San Luis is a weird one because, like sites, the water is coming in from somewhere else. So there's not really a natural inflow to San Luis. It's primarily, taking water from the what are they called? The canals that run down the east side of San Joaquin. So I didn't have, that was one that I could not have data for. I can give you the data for any of the other ones, but not that one. Or let's see, I might have got the evaporation. I did calculate evaporation. Yeah, the evaporation there is 67,000 acre feet. And so my evaporation estimates come from, it's a report called, it's the Global Lake Evaporation Volume data set, Zhao et al. 2022. So it's based, just briefly, the methods are based on a remote sensing of like the satellites measure the wetted extent of the reservoir, and then they do energy balance calculations of things to calculate the evaporation volume. So they have it for basically every reservoir in the world.
Okay.
So I was kind of comparing those two data sets, the inflow from the NOAA Weather Forecast Center. And even though it's from the Weather Forecast Center, it's an analysis, of past, long-term past data. So I'm comparing that inflow to the evaporation volumes from that Global Lake Evaporation Volume data set. And then there was one, the River Forecast Center did not provide inflows for Almanor. So for Almanor, I calculated that from some USGS gauges.
Okay. Given what I understand, you say to be the variability among all these reservoirs, both the physical geography and kind of the operational variability, is it even reasonable to compare evaporative losses between or among reservoirs and no. In your professional opinion, is that useful, a useful comparison?
I think it's definitely useful to compare evaporation among reservoirs because a reservoir is a means, sort of by definition, it's a technology, and every reservoir has its own specific application of a means to capture water and then be able to use it at some other time, right? And so the evaporation is how much of that water are you losing off as consumptive use that can't be used for something else. So I think it's very relevant, especially if we compare it to, say, something like groundwater recharge, where your evaporation losses might be, I don't know, 0.01% or something.
Well, yeah, I'm going to stay focused
Or a tank,
on your opinion that sites is much higher than a number
Yes.
of reservoirs.
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't quite get that exchange. Yeah, I'm going to stay focused.
On your opinion that sites evaporation is much higher than other reservoirs. And I just want to make sure I understand
Yes.
The numbers that you're using to reach that conclusion.
Yes.
Are you as you at the end, excuse me, you said you went through an analysis, you looked at a couple data sets, and then you came up with an evaporative loss annual average, correct?
Yes, as a percent, yeah, as a percent of inflow.
Okay.
So I have the annual volumes, and then I have the annual volumes as a percent of inflow.
Okay, so it sounds like in reaching your conclusion, you were focused mainly on the percent of inflow.
Yes, because I think from a comparing, water management alternatives, that's the most relevant.
Okay, so if you use 200, and I don't dispute this, but you use the estimate of 280,000 acre feet as mean inflow, correct?
Yes.
For the site's reservoir.
Yeah, I think so. I'm not looking at my testimony right now, but it's in that ballpark within, a few percent, or maybe that's the number. Yeah.
Okay. And so if we use the number 27,000 acre feet as the evaporative loss number and compare that to an inflow of 280,000, we're around 10%, correct?
Yes.
Is 10% more consistent with the numbers you got in your analysis for those other reservoirs?
It is more consistent, but it's still on the higher end. So of those reservoirs, so of the 8 reservoirs that I looked at, or sorry, of the 9 that I looked at, including sites, 6 of them range from 2 to 6% of inflow. And then there's 3 that are much higher. There was sites, which I calculated as 16 to 17%. There's Berryessa, which is 26%, and there's Almanor, which is 18%. So again, that's
only gives us 9 reservoirs because you just included sites in the 3.
yes. So if we exclude sites, then that would be 8 reservoirs.
Got it. Okay.
And these data are, I thought about running more, but I thought, well, start with 10.
Did
Or
you
10.
provide your analysis as an exhibit in your testimony?
I did not. I was something I wanted to do, but I did not have time running against the testimony deadline. So I did this analysis a few weeks ago, but I'm very happy to share that.
Okay, I appreciate that. Do you recall when you first started preparing your testimony for this hearing?
Generally, I would have to look at if I look at my calendar, I could tell you the exact date.
Was it in 2024 probably?
Yes, it was roughly June, I think, June or July, like about a month before the exhibit deadline.
Okay, great, thank you. Can we turn to page 1 of your testimony, please? At lines 15 and 16, Mr. Asarian, you mentioned that this testimony demonstrates the potential for alternative water sources for those agricultural districts. And by that, I believe you're referring to the sites, agricultural districts.
Yes.
You recognize that managed aquifer recharge requires source water for that recharge, correct?
Yes, I do. And it's interesting. We were talking just about the Calusa Irrigation District that you'd asked me about. So after we signed off, I looked at that water management plan, and there was something in there saying, "Hey, we really want to do groundwater recharge, but we don't have any source waters to use for it."
Okay, but you recognize that managed aquifer recharge does require a source water, correct?
Of course.
And so in that respect, managed aquifer recharge doesn't provide an alternative water source, correct?
I would say it doesn't magically create water out of thin air, but it is an alternative way to store water, just as sites is a way to store water.
Okay.
So if sites is a reservoir source, then groundwater recharge is a reservoir source. Or sorry, if sites is a water source, then groundwater storage is a water source.
Well, storage and source water are different, correct?
Storage and source water are, yes.
Okay. So, okay.
I think we're just having kind of a terminology, or what do you call that? I don't know what the word for it is.
Well, you use the term water sources here on line 16 and specifically the phrase alternative water sources. And I was just asking you whether there's
Yes,
a distinction between a water source and storage. And I think you said yes.
there is a difference, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I guess in that respect, I would not consider, or yeah, it's continue.
Okay.
I think we're understanding that you can store water and then you can also get water from somewhere else, right?
And managed aquifer recharge requires that getting water for somewhere else, correct?
Yes, just like filling sites reservoir requires getting water from somewhere else.
Okay. So can we turn to page 16 of your testimony?
Or I shouldn't say somewhere else, just somewhere. Could be the water that's flowing, right by your farm.
So at lines 9 through 11, you identify recharged groundwater leaking to streams that is cooler than 65 degrees as one of the environmental benefits of managed aquifer recharge, correct?
Yeah.
Are you aware of any specific reaches of the Sacramento River that are gaining from groundwater as opposed to losing to groundwater?
I have not looked at that. I'm just thinking more generally about river valleys around the west that I've looked at and read about.
Okay.
I don't know specifically whether the valley is gaining or losing, and there's a good chance that it's losing now, but used to be gaining before all the groundwater pumping. So I'm not,
So, but you haven't
I
looked
wouldn't
at,
say to do groundwater recharge just for this benefit. I'm just trying to place it in the context of comparing it to reservoir surface water being released out into the river.
so I believe you mentioned in your presentation that the volume of water that can be applied for managed aquifer recharge depends on a conveyance system of some kind and capacity to carry that water. Is that correct?
Yes, there has to already be water there. But yeah, if you're trying to enhance it, you need to, I guess in a general sense, change the way the water is flowing around the landscape. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I should have asked you more generally. You recognize that the volume of water that can be applied at the field scale depends on the existence of a conveyance system and capacity to carry water to those recharge sites, correct?
Yes, I mean you could build a new conveyance system, but obviously it's way easier and cheaper to use one if one already exists.
But in any event, you need some way to carry the water from the source to the recharge site, correct?
Yes, either that or do something like you know, a beaver dam or something like that to slow the water down to give the water more time to sink in. So you either have to move the water or slow the water down.
Okay. And if you're recharging surface water from a surface source, that's going to require diversion infrastructure to take water out of the surface water source, correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
unless you're doing something like I talked about with the beaver dam or something like a beaver dam where you're slowing the water down and infiltrating it on site.
So have you performed any analyses regarding infrastructure availability and needs to perform managed aquifer recharge at a level that would replace the volumes that are being sought from the site's reservoir?
No, I haven't, but I think that would be a really interesting thing for someone to do if it has not been done already. I guess the only thing I've done is just sort of thought conceptually about that the same canals that are going to bring the water to sites in a theoretical sense could use that water for a groundwater recharge. I don't know what the relative balance of, how much storage could be achieved.
Okay. Yesterday, you mentioned that there's excess capacity in Glenclusa Canal and Tehama-Clusa Canal. And I think you were suggesting that that capacity could be used for managed aquifer recharge. Is that a fair assessment of your statement?
Yes, I mean, not that we could just flick a switch and have it happen tomorrow, but conceptually, if there are times when my assumption is that there's times, especially during irrigation season, where there's zero capacity in the canal. And then there's other times in the winter where there's probably significant capacity in that canal. And I think also that as part of the construction of sites, the conveyance capacity of those would be enhanced through, I don't know, more pumps or more screens or something like that. But I think the general infrastructure is there, but yeah.
Okay.
That answer your question.
Yeah, I think you also stated that if site's reservoir is built and water is conveyed through those canals, that in the winter time, sites would take up all that capacity in those canals, correct?
I would think so. If I were paying $4.5 billion for a reservoir or paying however much of it the people are constructing it are paying for it, that I would want to use it to the fullest capacity as possible, especially if I had acquired water rights to do that.
So are you aware that Sites is proposing to divert at Red Bluff and Hamilton City at volumes and rates that are less than the capacity of the diversion and conveyance facilities during the times that Sites will divert?
That could make sense if there wasn't if they were not able to, obtain the rights to take that water from the river.
Well, even at
It's
the
kind of a balance, right? There's how much water can be taken from the river, and then there's how much can you deliver through the canal. So I don't know why in a reservoir that you're trying to fill as much as you can in wet years that in under conditions when flows are higher than average. I don't know why you wouldn't put as much water through there as you could, but I don't know whether the constraint is conveyance capacity or ability to divert water from the river.
So you're not aware that even at maximum diversion capacity that's being proposed to the Sites reservoir project, that even at that maximum capacity, it's less than the capacity of the diversion facilities and the conveyance canals. I'm going to strike that and restate the question. So you're not aware that even at the proposed maximum diversion rates, that the volume of water that would be diverted at those rates is less than the capacity of the diversion facilities and the canals.
I'm not aware. It doesn't really make any sense why somebody would spend this much money on a project and not use it to the fullest capacity. But so no, I'm not aware of that.
Okay. So I think in the same context yesterday, you also mentioned that if the Sites reservoir is built, all of the water that's in the Sacramento River would go to Sites reservoir and then would therefore not be available for managed aquifer recharge projects. Is that correct?
I'm just saying, as I think other experts and people have testified to, there's I guess I could say substantial controversy and debate about whether there is any extra water at this point in the Sacramento River that can be used for storage. And so if Sites gets water rights to divert that water and starts diverting that water, then I guess I would say it would certainly limit the possibilities for additional amounts of water to be taken out on top of that to be used for groundwater recharge.
So you're not aware that Sites experts that testified earlier in this proceeding found that there will still be water available in the Sacramento River over and above the amounts diverted by the Sites project.
I know there's bypass flows and things like that. Like the river is not literally being dried up.
Well, so you're not aware that these same experts found that there would be water available in the Sacramento River over and above the quantity that they divert.
I think that would depend on the definition of what available means.
Well, available for diversion.
Under what do you mean by that? Like it's that there is water present in the river?
Available to take out of the river, assuming you had a proper right to do so.
Yeah, but I think getting the proper rights is going to depend on a lot of things that have been discussed earlier in this hearing, such as the need to maintain delta outflows and unresolved tribal water rights. And I don't know all the details of that stuff, but
yeah, and I'm not asking you for questions about the rights that would be necessary to take that additional available water. I'm just asking you whether you're aware that the Sites experts found there would still be additional available water to divert even after Sites diverts for the project.
No, I'm not aware of that because I don't know why the project wouldn't take as much water as it can, because there's only limited opportunities when diversions could occur. So
So did you review the site's water availability analysis in preparing your testimony?
Um, I looked at it, and I'll get more into this when I come back to testify about water quality in a few weeks. I think on the 21st is the tentative schedule. I looked at the water availability analysis for that in order to get sort of daily hydrographs of what flows might be with the diversions in place. So I talked to some of the other common interest experts and said, you know, what's the best data source to use for what daily diversions might be. And so I use that thing, and I use that spreadsheet, and then I read some through the memo that describes it. I wouldn't say I'm somewhat familiar with it. I didn't review it in a super detailed way, but I'm aware generally of like what constraints were imposed in that, because I had initially attempted to try to replicate the diversion constraints myself, and then realized it was too confusing, and I might as well use existing estimates.
Okay. Can we turn to page 17 of your testimony? At lines 10 through 12, you state that in the San Joaquin Valley, only a few percent of groundwater overdraft could be reversed with local sources, but that transfer of additional water from the Sacramento River could reverse additional portions of groundwater overdraft, correct?
Yes, and if you just scroll down, there's a citation that supports that. I think you got to go to the next page. Additional portions of groundwater overdraft 65. Yeah. So that'd be a footnote on the following page is the reference. Yeah.
And on page 1 of your testimony, you identify the 2 sites agricultural districts that are located in the San Joaquin Valley, correct?
Yes.
And those are Rosedale Rio Bravo Water District and the Wheeler Ridge Maricopa Water Storage District, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Are you aware that these 2 districts recharge groundwater basins in their area for later withdrawal and use within their district boundaries?
Nope, I don't know anything about them other than where they are on the map.
Okay. Well, assuming they do recharge groundwater basins, sites that deliveries from the sites project could facilitate those recharge efforts, correct?
Yeah, I suppose so.
Okay. On page 18 of your testimony, you refer to groundwater sustainability plans that have proposed managed aquifer recharge projects in subbasins that encompass the agricultural water districts with site subscriptions.
Yes.
These projects have not yet been implemented, correct?
Yes, that is my understanding based on a relatively brief review of those groundwater sustainability plans.
Okay. So did you have an opportunity to review the testimony of Jeffrey Davids? He is one of the site's experts.
I saw his summary presentation, and the 20-minute presentation, and that was what, a month ago or something, or a few weeks ago. And I did just this week in prep for this, I did look for his testimony and was not able to. I don't think I was able to find it, but I think if his summary was a good summary of his testimony, which I assume it was, I'm aware of what he analyzed. Yeah.
Okay, so you're aware that he analyzed the potential for sites project water to serve as a source of groundwater recharge for these groundwater recharge projects, correct?
I would not characterize it like
Yeah.
like that. He looked, I think what I think the most powerful way to use those canals for groundwater recharge would be to divert water from the Sacramento River and then sort of I don't know where the best places are, but at certain strategic places along the routes of those canals, then run water out from those canals and do the agricultural managed aquifer recharge along the path of the canals. And it's my understanding that Dr. Davids did not do that. He just looked at, well, there's going to be more water in those canals because that water is going to sites, and then how much extra would leak out of it. He also looked at the reservoir is going to be there, so how much groundwater is going to leak there, and a few other what I would say is sort of incidental groundwater recharge. But it's my understanding he did not look at like a focused effort of how could those canals be used to enhance recharge to the maximum amount possible.
Well, I wanted to ask you about whether you were familiar with his part of the analysis that looked at using stored water from the site's reservoir as a source for groundwater recharge projects in the Colusa subbasin for the ag districts with site subscriptions overlying that subbasin.
Oh, you mean storing the water, diverting the water in the canals, storing it in sites, and then the allocations of those local districts using that water for groundwater recharge.
Right.
Yes.
So you're aware he undertook that analysis?
Yeah.
And so do you agree with his assessment that the site's project water could serve as a source for these groundwater recharge projects in the Colusa subbasin?
Sorry, repeat the question. Do I agree with it?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, just say one thing.
Yeah. Do you agree that the site's project water could serve as a source for these groundwater recharge projects in the Colusa subbasin?
Yes, it could, although it seems a little backwards to me to divert the water into a surface water reservoir, evaporate, a fraction of it, whether that's 10% or whether that's 16 or 17%. And then later, like the next winter or something, then use the water for groundwater recharge. I mean, why not just put it straight from the canal into the recharge project? But so maybe that's a long answer to your question, but yes, it is possible, but it seems confusing to me that it would be done that way, or that would be the best way to do it.
So are you aware that Sites is applying for a storage right?
I would assume so. They're applying for a diversion right, and they're going to be storing a lot of water. Then yeah, I would assume they're applying for a storage right.
And are you aware that storage rights require you to put the water in storage first before beneficially using it?
I'm not really familiar with or
calls for a legal conclusion.
I'm just asking if he's aware.
Based on your understanding, Mr. Asarian, go ahead.
Repeat the question, please.
Yeah, based on your understanding, are you aware that storage rights require that the diverter put the water in storage first before it's applied to beneficial use?
That makes sense, although I haven't thought or done any focused study of storage rights.
Okay.
And I would assume that there would also be a way to apply for a groundwater storage right, and you could put the water directly from the canal into groundwater storage without running it through surface storage first. But I don't know that, so I'm not a law expert.
Just a few more questions. On page 18, you cite a study that is contained in Exhibit WCT 27 that concludes that using managed aquifer recharge during high flows would cost about $37 to $136 an acre foot, correct?
Yes.
And are you aware that the analysis performed in this study is not a water availability analysis? In other words, they didn't look at whether water is actually available to undertake these efforts, correct?
I believe that is correct, although they did, I think, screen to the highest 10% of flows during the year, which I presume that the that water would be available, or that it's not like totally devoid of applicability, you know.
Yeah, I'm going to rephrase my question. I
Okay.
mixed two concepts. Um, so the study did not consider the water rights that may be necessary to utilize those high flows, correct?
I think that is correct, yeah.
Okay. And so so the cost estimates, is it fair to say that they didn't consider the cost of water right permitting that may be necessary to facilitate the groundwater recharge efforts?
You know, I didn't have the time and energy to look at their financial calculations. I noticed that it was, you know, published in a well-regarded journal, and just took their economic calculations at face value, because that's not my area of expertise.
Well, I'm just asking you about the elements that went into that economic analysis, when what was included and what may not have been included. And so
I don't know. The paper is there. We could read it, you know.
so you don't recall that it didn't include any estimates of the cost of permitting for a water right, correct?
I don't know.
And so you don't recall whether it did or did not include any a cost component related to other permitting, for example, for fisheries permitting that may be necessary.
I don't know.
And you don't recall whether it included or didn't include any cost estimates related to environmental analyses under the California Environmental Quality Act?
I don't know.
And do you recall whether this estimate includes any cost for conveyance of the water once it's withdrawn?
It's my understanding he didn't actually read the study, so you keep asking questions about something he hasn't.
Or
Right.
not the I didn't focus on the economic parts of it. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm assuming that's Mr. Mooney that was speaking.
Yes, that was Mr.
Yes.
Thank you. Could we pin Mr. Mooney as well?
If he's on camera, we can, but I think Mr. Mooney is,
I'm on
you're
camera.
welcome to be sometimes on or sometimes off, but yes, okay. Thank you.
I think you noted in your testimony too that that study didn't account for water that may be permanently lost underground or to a stream. Am I recalling that correctly?
What do you mean by permanently lost?
Well, not available for withdrawal by the groundwater producers at a later time.
Yes, I believe that they did not model the fate of the water once it is recharged. But from my perspective as a watershed hydrologist, I would not consider that water lost. It just maybe, you know, moved downstream or moved down aquifer.
But the groundwater producers aren't going to get the same quantity of water out that they put in, correct?
I think it would probably depend a lot on the situation.
Okay.
Some of them
My
would,
understanding is your testimony is you were assuming that some water
some,
was
yes,
probably lost. Yeah.
some, and it's gonna vary probably widely from almost all of it to almost none of it, depending
And
on
if the
site-specific
cost
factors
estimate, sorry.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
I would say it will vary widely according to, site-specific factors, and, that's something you could use a groundwater model to try to answer.
Was it your understanding that the cost estimate provided was based on the volume of water input?
Yes, the amount recharged, yeah.
Okay, so if you're getting less water out, the denominator in that calculation is going to be smaller, correct?
Yeah, by some, unknown and site varying fraction.
And that's going to make the cost per acre foot higher, correct?
Yeah, by some unknown varying amount.
Okay.
But I would note that, in comparison to a surface water reservoir, none of that water, or essentially none of it, is being consumed. So it can be used by downstream users for diversion or by fish or.
But that doesn't change the fact that the cost for the growers or the entities conducting that groundwater recharge project is higher than the estimate, correct? After accounting for that lost water on a per acre foot basis.
I'm not familiar. I mean, I would say generally yes, but I'm not familiar with how the sort of how the regulations on that work. So but it's not like the only water that's in the aquifer is the amount that is recharged by that specific project. So I don't know if the landowners have, I don't know how that's accounted for in sort of the water rights system, and it would probably depend on like which sigma groundwater basin you're in. And there's probably some where if you recharge 100 units of water, you're allowed to take 100 out, and then there's others where maybe you're allowed to take 90, or I think that's kind of a regulatory question, really.
Well, my questions were intended to only be asking you about the quantity that was input in the study, and not about any other sources of water. So with that clarification, does that change any of the math that we walked through and your conclusions?
It's kind of a hard thing for me to wrap my head around. So we're all on the same page here. So you do some project to enhance the amount of water that is going into recharge, and then some of that presumably is pumped out later, and some of it maybe leaks off into the stream. So that is the cost to recharge that water.
But my question to you was whether the study calculated the costs based on the input volume.
Yes, the cost is based on the input volume, is my understanding.
So if you actually get less water out, then the cost per acre foot yield is going to be higher than the estimate, correct? If you use the amount you can get out as the denominator.
I mean, all the water is mixing together once it gets down into the aquifer. So,
But we're assuming that you either can't access all of the water that you input, or there's maybe some sort of regulatory limitation on taking it all out in order to protect the aquifers. So you're getting less water out, correct? I think you acknowledge that. And I'm not asking you for a percentage. You just said you'd get less water out, correct?
it's kind of an accounting and regulatory question. So if the regulators say that you're only allowed to pump out some portion of what you recharge, then yes, you can only take out some portion. If they say you can take it all out, then you can take it all back out.
So in the study you cited, I think you acknowledged that they didn't account for water that might be lost after it was input, correct?
Yeah, that might. And again, I wouldn't use the term lost because it's not consumed. But
No longer accessible to the producer.
Yes, those particular molecules of water, some of them will go away.
Okay, so if we actually look at the estimate that was provided in the study and consider the water that's actually being yielded from the project and use that quantity as the denominator in the calculation, the cost estimate is going to be higher than the one in the study, right?
Well, another thing I just thought of is that there's a time lag. So it's not like that water instantly leaks out, right? It might leak out a month from now, or 10 years from now, or a century from now. So it is still accomplishing the purpose of enhancing the groundwater storage. It's just a question of how long it lasts in there, and what are the costs and benefits of routing that water through there.
I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. Let's go ahead and see if we can finish up our cross here. Mr. Soderlund, do you have questions for Mr. Asarian?
I do not, thank you.
And Ms. Auftenberg, do you have questions? Or the appropriate representative from the Bureau?
Yes, sorry, this is Amy. Sorry. Just trying to find my unmute button, but no, we do not have questions.
Thank you. And Ms. Mendel-Rice, do you have questions for Mr. Asarian?
State Water Contractors does not have questions. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Mr. Mooney, do you have redirect for Mr. Asarian?
Very short redirect.
All right, then let's go ahead and handle that, please.
Mr. Asarian, can you elaborate on why farmers might be using more water than necessary?
Yeah, so I talked some about that, but I guess some things to add would be that I guess it would depend on the meaning of the word necessary, right? But some of the things that could go into the calculations would be, or the calculus, the considerations would be things like the regulated deficit irrigation, where, just to make up a hypothetical number, if the farmer could reduce the water application and the consumptive use by 5%, reduce the water application and consumptive use by 20%, but only have a 5% loss in yield for the individual, and for the individual farmer, that 5% might be meaningful to their operation, right? Maybe they've got thin margins on their how much money they're making, so 5% could make a difference to them. So they would want to do that, even though maybe at the whole valley scale, what if we really need to reduce water use by 20%? These are just hypothetical numbers, right? If we really need at the system scale to reduce water by 20%, and we could do that with only a 5% loss in yield of the crop, that might be something that might be worth doing, especially if maybe the farmer could be compensated for it or something like that. So that's just one example of why. Others would be just, it takes a lot of work to manage something exactly perfectly, and time is money, and so farmers may not manage things to the, the 100% degree, because there's costs to that. So,
That is all.
okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mooney. With that, Mr. Ferguson, do you have any additional questions?
I do not.
Thank you. And I think we have completed this. Mr. Asarian, thank you for joining us today. And I know we will see you again, I believe, on the 21st. But with that, for now, you are excused. Thank you very
Okay.
much.
Thank you.
May I
And-
ask one question
Yes, Ms.
before he
Scott.
leaves? Just before he leaves, and I think I can do it really quickly. The tribes, Yurok, Karuk, Hoopa, Quartz Valley, and Block, the last one I did,
They just changed their name. They used to be called Rezaghini.
but
now
you
they're
said
called-
Block or something.
Now they're called Pulikla.
Can you spell that? Sorry.
You know what? I'm gonna Google it just to make sure that I get it right. That it's a new
Right.
name.
I would Google it, but I wouldn't even know where to start.
Yes. Pulikla.
Thank you so much. That's it.
Thank you. And thank you both.
Thank you.
We will take a break. I think now is a good time. When we return, we will pick up with Mr. King and start with, I think we can talk about how to do this, but I think we'll clearly demarcate opening statement and then separately your testimony. But let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break and we'll return at 10:27. All right, Ms. Cott, are you ready for us to go back on the record?
All set, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Soderlund.
Yeah, apologies. I just wanted to let you know that I will have to step away for the 11 o'clock hour. If Mr. King's direct and cross finishes before then, I do not plan to have any cross-examination questions. And I will be back for the afternoon to the extent that we have discussions about evidentiary issues and that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Soderlund. Ms. Chester.
I just wanted to raise some objections on behalf of the site's project authority related to Mr. King's direct testimony before he got started.
All right, let's go ahead and do that now. I think we'll just go back to back on what we're calling an opening statement and testimony. So let's go ahead and hear those now, please.
Sure. So the site's project authority objects to King 68 for purposes of scope objections on the grounds of Evidence Code Section 801 as inadmissible opinion testimony by an expert witness. Also on the grounds of Government Code Section 11513, Subdivision F, the probative value of the testimony being substantially outweighed by undue consumption of time. We also object to King 73 to the extent that Mr. King refers to or discusses it as part of his case in chief as an untimely submission of evidence. And lastly, we would object to the marking of King 74 as an exhibit, but can follow up with further objections in writing.
Okay. Thank you. And then you will, per usual practice, identify all of those in writing.
Yes, in an email, yes.
I think I have a question from our team as to whether you intend King 74 or King 75. I'm not sure. Maybe Mr. Anderson, can you articulate what the issue is there? I just want to make sure we have this, we're talking about the same exhibit. Maybe we'll return to that. We will return to that issue. Sorry. I think Mr. Anderson is having some connectivity issues. So with that, let's go ahead. I will turn to you, Mr. King. What I'd like to do is go ahead and hear your opening statement. I want to make sure there's a clear demarcation between your opening statement, which does not go into the evidentiary record, and then the portion of your statement that is a summary of your direct testimony, which will require you to take the oath. And will be subject to inclusion in the evidentiary record. Does that make sense to you that those am I correct that those are separate? You have those?
No, one's for the administrative record, one's for the evidentiary record. And so, but just to clarify, King 68, is that the spreadsheet of the sites on the water? Is that you're objecting to?
I'm objecting to your written testimony, which I believe was marked as King 68.
Oh, you're objecting to my whole written testimony?
Yes, on the grounds stated, those are our initial scope objections, but we don't waive the opportunity to submit further written objections at the appropriate time.
Can you object to a complete written testimony? I mean, don't you have to object to certain parts of it?
We are objecting to the scope on certain grounds under Evidence Code Section 801 and the Government Code 11513 Subdivision F. If there's further questions, I mean, we can talk about it, sounds like later today, opportunity for response to objections. So I'll leave it to the hearing officer.
King 73 is the email from JP Robinette. Is that what you're objecting to there?
I believe so. It was transmitted to the AHO staff on August 27th, 2024, related to King Exhibit 64.
Right. Okay. There you go. And then King 74. What are we interpreting that to be? I think it's my my opening statement, isn't it?
Yes, I'm referring to the email sent yesterday where you asked to mark your opening statement as Exhibit King 74. I just want to mark that for the record now, although we would follow up with more detail for written evidentiary objections.
Well, it's not supposed to be in the evidence. It's just for administrative record. So you're objecting to inclusion of,
Mr.
yeah,
Mr. King, I think the authority, as I understand it, is just covering their bases, not
Okay.
knowing whether or not your intent would be to try to offer it into the evidentiary record. So I think
Perfect.
the objection here is noted, and we can, if it evaporates or is no longer applicable, we can deal with it then. But it sounds like there may not be a problem.
Yes.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you. Okay, so I'll start now. So, board members, if present, presiding officer Kunze, fellow parties, TNM Kings, first like to acknowledge our comments relate to the site's reservoir project
Mr. King,
site.
Okay,
Mr.
yeah,
King,
I'm sorry. Really
just slow
slow.
way down, please.
Okay.
Take your
Okay.
time.
If you could start over, thank you.
Thank you. And it's not, I include, it's subject to objection. I include this in email yesterday and to be included as exhibit. So there's a written, or I'm just going to be reading from my written testimony. So, okay, thank you. The TNM Kings would like to first acknowledge that our comments relate to the site's reservoir project and the area of the proposed operations plan, which are located in the historical lands of the Putwan and Che'e Foco Band of Pomo peoples. We'd like to make the following 11 statements for the administrative record. 1, we assert riparian rates dating back to our 1869 deed and believe there's no justification.
Mr. King,
yes.
for my sake, can you slow down, please?
Okay. But I know I had 10 minutes, so
well, just take your time. It's no use
okay.
rushing
Yeah,
through
I'm
it.
not going to do anything more than the 11 points I have here. So
Okay.
if I could, I'm a little nervous being shut off from time. So
I'm sorry, is it possible to share that letter so maybe I can follow him?
We can certainly make that available to you.
Okay.
It's part of our public record, so we will certainly make that available.
Yeah, if that could be emailed to me, that'd be great. Thank you.
you want to
Yes.
wait for that? And
That's okay. As long as I have my hands on it, I'll be okay. Thank you.
okay, great. And so I'm going to start on point 1 again.
Sure, please.
Okay.
Yes.
If I have the volume.
I don't know why there's feedback, but there is.
Okay, how's that?
That's good. Better.
Thank you. And I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. King. It does appear that Mr. King is intending to read the opening statement into the record, and we would stipulate to that the policy statement or opening statement, whatever it is, can be marked for the administrative record purposes. I don't know if it's a good use of time. I think your hearing notice discourages people from just reading their written statements that have been submitted. And so I would just suggest that if he is intending to just simply read that text that he emailed to all the parties in the hearing officer yesterday, we would stipulate to that being part of the administrative record at this point.
I'm thinking, thank you, Mr. Hitchings. I understand with and generally agree with your point, but I haven't read the opening statement yet. And I think it will help to orient me to what's coming next. So although normally I think that would absolutely be the approach, I think we will go ahead and hear this and at a rate of speed where I can comprehend it, hopefully. Mr. Mooney, was that an errant hand or did you have something else you wanted to add?
I was just going to say, I listened to all the previous open statements, and there was a number of, folks from agencies and various interest groups in support of sites that read directly from their opening statements that were permitted. So I don't know why Mr. King would be treated differently, but you've already made your indication. So that was just my comment.
All right, thank you.
And just my intent has been, from efficiency. I tend to talk too much, and by putting it in writing, I worked hard to try to make it as most efficient as possible. So that's my intent.
I don't want to discourage the practice of planning statements. So please, Mr. King, it is now, I think, really back to you.
Okay, so I'll start again on 1. We assert riparian rights dating back to our 1869 deed and believe there's no justification for the fact that our early 1980s appropriative rights are the only appropriative rights in the Colusa Basin that have not been subordinated. We assert that the October 24, 23 letter from the site's executive director, the Colusa Drain Mutual Water Company board, was intended to coerce appropriate right holders not to protest. 2, it is imperative that the approval of the application be conditioned on maintaining minimum flows in inclusive basin drain, I call it CBD, at all times for future beneficial uses within the channel of the CBD and the riparian habitat on the CBD. Furthermore, we believe minimum flows are necessary for the long-term sustainability of domestic wells near College City and nearby groundwater-dependent ecosystems that rely on these flows. We believe that the public trust law of the state of California would demand this, and that this was reflected regarding in-stream, quote-unquote, in-stream beneficial uses on page 7 of the Water Board's decision 1590 on February 17, 1983. 3, it is important that the administrative record notes that there are about 20,000 acres of the Sacramento National Wildlife Complex of riparian habitat on the CBD and several thousand acres of NRCS wetland reserve acreage on the CBD. We assert that there are federal reserve water rights regarding the groundwater quality for the refuges and federal reserve water rights to the natural flow of the CBD for the benefit of the acres enrolled in the NRCS wetland reserve program. 4, we believe that the current operations plan is materially different from the previous permutations of the Coosa Reservoir project because it solely relies on Tehama-Coosa Canal for conveyance and a new Dunnigan pipeline for interconnect to the Sacramento River and the Yellow Bypass. We note that the TC Canal did not exist at the time of the 1977 priority date for this application. We also note that the 2017 WISIP application to the California Water Commission relied on a direct interconnect to the Sacramento River in Coosa County, which is the county of origin, rather than Yolo County. Finally, the 2017 version required that the environmental flows to the Yellow Bypass travel downstream through the length of CBD Coosa County to Yolo County and then to the Yellow Bypass. All previous versions of the Coosa Reservoir only provided for interconnects to the Sacramento River or Yellow Bypass that were solely located in Coosa County as a county of origin. 5, the use of the TC Canal for conveyance and the site of the interconnect from the Dunnigan pipeline are both problematic and arguably a reckless use of state and federal funds. First, we think that many taxpayers would think it is reckless to build a $4 billion reservoir and then rely on cement canal that crosses the highest level of observed subsidence for delivery of stored water, especially without a redundancy alternative conveyance plan. Regarding the Dunnigan pipeline at Bird Creek, the interconnect is located in the midst of one of the flattest water bodies in the Coosa Basin, with no or negative north to south gradient for approximately 15 to 20 miles. At this point, the CBD really functions more like a sump rather than a canal, since it relies on water backing up 13 miles rather than having CBD flows from north to south. Due to a lack of grade, this part of the CBD likely exhibits high seasonal turbidity, as we know it has low observed dissolved oxygen and the presence of methyl mercury under its US EPA 303D impaired water body status. Is this really a good place to dump water with high levels of mercury, chromium, and manganese, especially so close to the ridge cut into the Yellow Bypass, where these sediments could result in the transport of methylated mercury and chromium and manganese, which could oxidate to the hexavalent form of chromium? 6, mercury and chromium are not only present in the sediment and mining materials in the watershed for the CBD, but there are documented observations of mercury and chromium in the effluent of salt springs in and near the project site. C.F. Bergstresser, in his October 1968 USGS report, documented 17 springs in Coosa County and 5 springs in southern Glenn County near the project site. Of these springs documented by Bergstresser, 6 of these springs included mercury in their effluent. 4 of these springs included chromium in the effluent. The spring at Salt Lake on Funk's Creek watershed had a mercury observation of 17 parts per billion and a specific conductance of 72,300. More recently, in the USGS 2013 Open File Report 2013-1056 by Hotham, Rituba et al., mercury was observed in a salt spring located in the west fork of Sulphur Creek nearby. In Table 2, page 29 of this report, total mercury observed at 1,580 parts per billion equivalent and specific conductance of 25,129. The mercury effluent from Salt Lake makes its way to Funk's Reservoir and then either to Delavan National Refuge or down the TC Canal. The Sulphur Creek mercury effluent makes its way to CBD via Bear Creek and Cache Creek. 7. The EIS did not examine the risk of the hexavalent form of chromium contamination from the reservoir itself or as a result of recharge from downstream reservoir flows. The work of Dr. Gene Morrison of the USGS and Colorado School of Mines has documented that a significant amount of the soils in Colusa and Yolo County have chromium and manganese sediment from serpentine rock weathering, and water recharge can lead to the generation of the hexavalent form of chromium, resulting from a redox-related oxidation of trivalent form of chromium to the hexavalent form of chromium. Water recharge from sites reservoir at the reservoir and downstream can add to generation and contamination of groundwater by the hexavalent form of chromium. Perhaps this type of contamination can negatively impact the lower trophic part of the aquatic food chain, but also poses risks to domestic wells and public supply systems in the drainage area of the reservoir and conveyance system. Most problematic may be the recharge near septic systems. We'd also note that the southern portion of reservoir footprint was a site for oil drilling in the mid-1860s when the Colusa Petroleum Company was formed in 1865. And perhaps there is some relationship between hydrocarbons and the redox generation of the hexavalent form of chromium that could impact local domestic wells or public supply systems in Williams and Maxwell. 8. The buildup of excess salt in the CBD is a result of poor drainage, may be related to the capture and reuse of flows in the CBD by Glen Colusa Irrigation District and the other parties of the 5-part agreement. In Section 21B of the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation Service Agreement with the Colusa Drain Mutual Water Company, Contract W0693, it states, the United States, quote, the United States recognizes that water quality is a concern within the service area of the contractor, meaning, end of quote, meaning the Colusa Drain Mutual Water Company service area. In the USBR environmental assessment between GCID and Colusa Drain Mutual Water Company, EA 23-06-NCAO, on page 4, the USBR states, GHCID's conservation and recycling culminated in a quote-unquote zero outflow 100% recycling policy on water applied in rice production in its service area, which restricted outflow to drain to leakage to the Davis Weir. It goes on to state that this policy resulted in a quote-unquote buildup of salts, end quote. 9. It can be argued that some of the short-term capacity for the project has already been built by the Glen Colusa Irrigation District and Maxwell Irrigation District via 3 dams, which act as reservoirs, and 100 miles canals, which act as storage sumps. Maxwell Irrigation District operates 2 dam facilities, one at Willow Creek on the CBD and the other just south of the Delavan Refuge at Maxwell Road on Stone Corral Creek. Glen Colusa Irrigation District operates the Davis Weir Bladder Dam on the CBD just south of the Colusa National Wildlife Refuge. None of these dams have been registered with the DWR Division of Dams, even though the stored water behind these dams is likely in excess of 49 acre-feet most of the water year. 10. It is possible that the motivation to exclude the Colusa County portion of the CBD for the conveyance of site's water was to make it easier to capture an average of 100 to 150,000 acre-feet of rainwater runoff each year and effectively store this amount in the proposed site's reservoir for sale during critically dry years. The operation of these dams by GCID and Maxwell Irrigation District under the guise of the 5-party agreement allows the capture of the rainfall runoff from approximately 500,000 acre part of the Colusa Basin watershed north of the Davis Weir Dam. Based on the formula set out on page 10 of the 1989 USGS paper regarding the water quality for Cortina Rancheria, we calculate that each acre of watershed captures 3 to 4 inches of rainwater runoff, which equates to an average of 125,000 acre feet of captured water each season. The storage of water is already happening, and that is why we saw no flows for 10 to 14 days below the Davis Weir Bladder Dam during May of this year, which was a wet year. Once the reservoir is built, there will be great economic incentive to keep as much rainfall runoff in the reservoir created by the Davis Weir Bladder Dam to meet the irrigation needs south of the TRR reservoir and put the Sacramento water that would otherwise been used for irrigation in the site's reservoir for future sale. We believe this is a violation of the scope of the easement granted to RD 2047, since it relies on dams and other obstructions to the natural flow of water, which are specifically prohibited in the historical easements granted to RD 2047. We also believe that this is a proper reason why the proposed operations plan for the authority has not included the 6-mile stretch of the CBD between the Davis Weir Bladder Dam and Balsam Dam, our ecological dead zone reference. Finally, 11, is our opinion that the water storage rights currently held by the County of Colusa will be sold or transferred, since we believe the county will become insolvent in the next 5 years. We believe the county has been irresponsible in holding such a large relative storage right, which is over 3 times the size of GCID's participation, and the cost of membership and storage rights has contributed to the current financial problems of the county. We also believe that the MOA executed by the county is unconstitutional because it is taking of downstream water rights in Funks and Stone Crawl Creeks by a public entity without compensation. Finally, we believe that Chairman Gary Evans has made a false statement in his August 6, 2024 policy statement to the board, the water board, when he stated, some quote unquote, some might say that the sites project is taking, quote, extracting water from our local community. Quote, this is patently false. It is clear that the sites project is exporting Colusa County water down the Tama-Colusa Canal and circumventing the public trust and beneficial uses of Colusa County below the Davis Weir Bladder Dam. Chairman Evans' statement is in itself patently false and an unintentional untruth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. King. At this point, I think the next step will be for me to administer the oath, and then we can go to the oral summary of your written testimony. So if you would please raise your right hand. Mr. King, do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you will give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
You.
Thank you. And for this, just a reminder, I have read your written testimony.
Right.
So there's certainly no need to read that, but you're welcome to summarize the important points that.
Right. And then I would also, I prefer my statement of qualification, which I believe is 67A. I made one change to that, as I mentioned yesterday. I added the word pass regarding to my chair of the Strategic and Ag Innovation Committee for the Almond Board of California. And then also, I like to note 2 corrections of my testimony, clarifications.
Sure.
I apologize for not having better pages, but it's on PDF page 3, and it's section C3. I would like to omit the last sentence of that. The sentence saying this USBR environmental assessment was cited in the water rights discussion also. That was kind of cut and paste of an email I sent to Ellie Forsyth, and I forgot to delete that sentence because it refers to an email that's not part of this. And then the last part is on PDF page 6, section C7. The second paragraph starts with the sentence, the data gap that seems most apparent in the draft prospectus is needed for a detailed scientific investigation. This was the draft prospectus here is irrelevant to my testimony. This was part of comments I gave to the Delta Independent Science Board at a hearing in June 14th, 2023. And so the reference to a quote, a capitalized data gap and draft prospectus should be disregarded.
Okay, thank you, Mr. King. And then with those corrections, do you affirm that King 68 is a true and correct copy of your written testimony?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. And then you may proceed with a summary if you would like.
Okay, and you'll let me know my time. I just try to highlight, and then we'll go from there. So, thank you for the opportunity to summarize this. My first point was that we believe the site's application and the operation plan materially omits the consideration of the jurisdiction of Reclamation District 2047. RD 2047 was a grantee of the drainage easement for the Colusa subbasin north of Davis Weir Dam, and its geographical footprint encompasses almost all the site's proposed operation with Maxwell Irrigation District and Colusa Irrigation District. These irrigation districts cannot claim a greater property right than was granted to RD 24/7. The next point is that the State Water Resources Control Board in its decision 683, which was decided on November 27, 1957, adjudicated the appropriate rights for diverters of Colusa Basin drain in favor of the individual right holders and over the protests of Glen Colusa Irrigation District and Maxwell Irrigation District and a few other irrigation districts. Some of the same issues are present here than they were 74 years ago. Most of them, pretty much all of them, except that the irrigation districts didn't, that we saw the same issues outstanding. The HO should consider and respect the president and perspectives of Decision 683. The AHO should know that the Colusa Drain Mutual Water Company and the Colusa Basin Drainage District have no authority for the use of property rights for the fee simple title of any part of the Colusa Basin Drain. The authority has asserted that they're working with, especially the Colusa Drain Mutual Water Company, and basically implies that they have some jurisdiction over property rights. And the same goes for Colusa Basin Drainage District, which actually only has a scope of the Colusa Basin Drainage District is only in the Colusa Basin and does not extend to the Yolo Basin. And I believe the site's authority is exerting that too.
Hearing Officer Kinsey, I would object to the extent that those last couple of sentences are outside the scope of his written testimony.
Understood and affirmed. We will strike that piece of the testimony.
Thank you.
Fair enough. Should the Colusa County Flood Control should the Colusa County Flood Control and Water Conservation District be used to allow private landowners to invest or speculate on storage rights in the site's reservoir? The cost of storage was most recently assumed to be $18,700 per acre feet and require the investors to pay interest, charges at least $900 per acre foot for 6 years before any income can be realized during the construction phase of the project. Investors will have over $24,000 invested by the time the reservoir would be operational. Zone 3 of the Colusa County Flood Control and Water Conservation District was recently formed by the Colusa County Board of Supervisors for the benefit of approximately 70 private landowners with land within the service area of the Pajama-Colusa Canal. The legislative intent of the Colusa County Flood Control and Water Conservation District in Section 20 of the Act states that in its first sentence, the legislator hereby finds that the water and drainage problems in Colusa County require countywide water conservation, development of water resources, and control of storm, flood, and other waters. The last sentence states, investigations have shown conditions in the county to be peculiar to it, and hereby declare that a general law cannot be made applicable to the county, and the enactment of this special law is necessary for the conservation, development, control, and water use for the public good and protection of life and property within the county. Contrary to what is maybe assumed, only the landowners of Zone 3 will be able to use any stored water from the site's reservoir for irrigation, assuming they can afford the cost to grow crops or irrigate orchards. Sites is likely to raise the value of water in the whole Colusa subbasin when in-basin groundwater trading is implemented or using groundwater substitution, because there will be substantial economic incentive to sell all sites water and pump groundwater, because the site's water market will be in connected with the water transfers by settlement contractors. Most of Colusa County is not in Zone 3, and for those landowners to benefit from Stone Corral and Funk's Creek flows for recharge or winter irrigation, there'll be a net loss of available water. I also mentioned that Quetzaldehi Nation has been included, and I question why was it included? The proposed operation plan of the ecological dead zone from Davis Weir Dam, Balsam Dam to the Davis Weir Dam to the Balsam Dam, since there's no provision to maintain flows to beneficial and stream rights. So just I should restate that. So by not including that in the operations plan, you're going to create an ecological dead zone. The EIR did not address the issue of chromium, and I will just summarize that I cited 2 papers with Dr. Jean Morrison and some of her colleagues regarding the risk of hexavalent form of chromium. The USBR environmental assessment of the Colusa Drain Mutual Water Company and GCID contract references the salt problem at Davis Weir and the problem of zero outflow policy of GCID. One of the justifications for the water transfer from GCID and Colusa Drain Mutual Water Company is to flush, quote unquote, flush the salts. I will also want to note that in 1892, the Salt Lake right off of Funk's Creek, which is going to be the bottom of the reservoir, was a site of the Crystal Salt Company. I quoted a article from the April 30th, 1892 edition of the Colusa Sun newspaper, where the local people in Colusa had a picnic basically at the salt mine in the base at the Salt Lake. They took the train. The ladies of Colusa took a train, which we had actually a train line. Took a train and spent the day there. And in that article references the natural gas, not only the salt, but the natural gas that was found in great abundance, and also the iodine that has a very. They talked about the strong levels of iodine at the site. My next point is regards the draft 303D, the US EPA draft 303D list of impaired water bodies that in the Colusa Basin drain. And I want to note that every water body, every tributary Sacramento River of Colusa County has a methyl mercury contamination issue. All the creeks that run into Colusa National Wildlife Refuge have bacteria or dissolved oxygen issues, which is consistent with the poor drainage conditions described in the USBR environmental assessment and the service contract between GCID and CDMYC, the Colusa Drain Mutual Water Company, which I already cited. Too much blending of salt water and the reuse of drain water under the 5-part agreement has resulted in a very poor water quality of the water at the Colusa National Wildlife Refuge. So the water bodies that identified as Colusa National Wildlife Refuge water bodies, because they're approximate, are the Colusa Basin Drain, which has several contaminants, including mercury and low dissolved oxygen, both of which would indicate the potential for the biotic reduction of methyl mercury. Freshwater Creek, which enters the Colusa Basin Drain north of the refuge for indicated bacteria. It is not clear what type of bacteria this is. Powell Slough, which is located at the refuge for low dissolved oxygen. Spring Creek, which is tributary to the Upper Salt Creek near Williams, which is different than the Lower Salt Creek that our protest relates to. Spring Creek has several pesticide contaminants, dissolved oxygen and salinity. Dissolved oxygen for the biotic reduction of methylmercury, and Spring Creek perhaps denotes a source of a saline creek, which explains the salinity, and perhaps the saline spring contains mercury in its effluent. Spring Creek is generally east of Sulphur Creek, which has documented saline spring that I've mentioned previously in my opening testimony that has significant levels of mercury in its effluent. See USGS Open File Report 2013-1056, Assessment of Mercury and Methylmercury in Water, Sediment, and Biota in Sulphur Creek in the vicinity of the Clyde Gold Mine and Elgin Mercury Mine, Coosa County, California, by Roger Hotham, James Rutuba, Brian Brousse, and Daniel Goldstein. And finally, Sand Creek for dissolved oxygen, and again indicating the anoxic conditions for the biotic reduction of methylmercury. The USDA 303D list also lists other water bodies, and I will note that it also lists Sulphur Creek for mercury, which relates to the USGS discovery, and then also Sycamore Slough, which is in Yolo County, for dissolved oxygen. It relates to the Coosa Basin drain at Bird Creek. Finally, my final, let's see, I got a couple more here. I also want to reference that our concern for the Delta and for the long-term sustainability of Sacramento environmental and agricultural sustainability is the contamination of the Sacramento's values groundwater aquifer due to natural occurring contaminants, which have been aggravated by overpumping. There is a question about the elevated EC concentrations in Sacramento River flows from the Coosa Trough via the Yellow Bypass, the natural occurring contaminants from groundwater redox, and the mercury and chromium that may be transported from foothills surface runoff. And I want to bring attention to the 2023 publication by Timothy Musson called Investigating Factors That Contribute to Phytoplankton Biomass Declines in the Lower Sacramento River. In that, he mentions that past studies have shown that the alkalinity of the Sacramento River can be as high as 72 milligrams. It can be very high, and he gives a scientific citation for that, compared to the American River, which can be about 1/3 of that reference. And my site ends with sudden declines in the phytoplankton biomass called the crashing of a bloom may be induced by physiological stress, followed by the compromise of cells, potentially in response to this change in alkalinity at the confluence of the Sacramento rivers and the American rivers and the Feather rivers. Finally, I want to talk about the GSP, and my statement would be is that the current cumulative groundwater overdraft, material subsidence, and unsustainability of the Coosa subbasin, and how wrong the operation plans can make the Coosa subbasin more unsustainable and degrade the area of ordinance rights. You know, as was mentioned by I won't say that. In October 26, 2023, the DWR completed its evaluation of the initial GSP and came up with 3 criteria. That's why it was incomplete. It didn't have a reasonable assessment of the overdraft, which means we have overdraft problems in the basin. Didn't address the chronic lowering of groundwater levels, and finally did not have management criteria for subsidence that was substantially compliant with the GSP regulations. And finally, I want to note that one of the comments even to the revised submission of the groundwater sustainability plan, we had comments that were received in June of 2024 from the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And they indicate that even the plan as currently submitted did not adequately describe the subbasin conditions that would constitute undesirable results for environmental users of water. And also it did not demonstrate selected thresholds that would be protective of groundwater dependent ecosystems or other environmental users. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. King. With that, what I'd like to do, I have a few questions, and I think it makes sense for me to start with them. That way, if the authority has follow-up on my questions, we can do that. Of course, I may have questions afterwards too. But I do, Mr. King, want to follow up and try to understand a little better your water rights and claimed water rights, just to make sure I have it straight. We don't need to get into great detail, but my understanding, and I think maybe I'll go in the order of most junior to more senior. My understanding is that you or T&M King Farms hold several permits issued by the State Water Board in the 1980s. Is that accurate?
Correct. And I should note that I'm assigning one of the three to the new purchasers of the land that we recently sold.
Okay. And then you also, as I understand, hold a water right license. Is that accurate? That's related to decision. You can 683.
Yeah, correct. Correct. That was confirmed in that decision with a multiple of other licenses. There was the members of the 5 parties actually protested that, but the water board decided to affirm those water rights. And I believe the priority date is spring of 1948 for that water right. It's application 12459, and I think it's license 4433, but I could be wrong.
Hearing Officer Kenzie, I apologize for the interruption, but I do want to note an objection on behalf of the Sites Authority that the water rights information was not submitted as exhibits in a timely manner or at all in this proceeding.
Noted. Fair enough.
I can't respond to that.
No, I think we're noting it for the record.
Okay.
But this may, once again, it's one of those things that may or may not be addressed as we move through the rest of this hearing, because there is another opportunity to submit.
I have mentioned why, how I looked at the record. So yeah, we'll talk about that when it comes for yeah.
And then you also claim, as I understand, riparian water rights associated with certain properties that abut the Colusa Basin drain. Is that right?
Yeah. So we have the 1869 deed from President U.S. Grant, and we've continuously held the property since then. We just completed a sale of a portion of the riparian land, and so where our assertion just relates to 265 acres on the Colusa Basin drain, which was the historical Colusa Trough, and 235 acres of that is now subject to a wetlands reserve program of the NRCS.
And then let me see so the claimed riparian right, has that been exercised or has it been used? Is water diverted under that right?
Yeah, so our appropriative rights go from so we've had a water stack of riparian appropriative, and then also rights under service agreement with Colusa Drain Mutual Water Company. We have diverted water outside of our appropriative right, which are one of our appropriative rights. Our appropriate rights start in March. The 1980 and 1982 appropriate rights start in March, subject to Term 91. The license, I believe, has a May date. So I believe we have extracted water before the March date, and after the November 1 date, we've used that for early irrigation. And then also we've done last 2 year ago, we also flooded some of our land for waterfowl. And so that would have been under our riparian rights, since they're outside of the time of use and of our appropriate rights.
I think that's all I have for now. I appreciate that. I just wanted to make sure I was following those. So I will look to either Ms. Chester or Mr. Hitchings. Do you have questions for Mr. King?
Yes, we do. Thank you. Mr. King, I'll reintroduce myself. My name is Michelle Chester. I'm counsel on behalf of the Sites Project Authority. I just want to ask a couple of questions. It's correct that you designated yourself in this proceeding as an expert witness, right?
That is correct, yes.
What is your area of expertise?
I'm a farm manager. I've been active in water issues. I've been active in water issues since when I applied for these rights when I was Davis. I have extensive experience in hydrology and groundwater recharge. Also, my undergraduate degree is in agricultural economics. I received the Department citation, one of two people in 1982 from UC Davis. A class of several thousand, Department citation in agricultural economics, taken many agriculture classes. Also serving, I'm on the board of the Cliffs County RCD. I've served as chair of the Strategic Ag Innovation Committee for the Almond Board of California, which oversees a $4 million budget of research for all types of research studies involving everything from hydrology, water quality, to production agriculture and genetic research. And then in addition to that, I'm a certified California naturalist by the UC A&R program, and been involved in the Groundwater Association. I'm a member of that for a while, and we were also a member of the Water Education Foundation for some time. But I've been have extensive focus on water-related issues in the last 10 years, with a lot of focus on water quality issues. But my background in water goes back to managing my property since 1971 and applying for water rights in 1980, 1982.
Thank you. Mr. Wooldridge, can you please bring up King 67A? Thank you. Mr. King, this is your revised statement of qualifications, correct? And can you please point to me your special training and education in water rights specifically?
Let me see. It's implicit in be managing this farm operation since I was 12 years old. Also, I was a member of the Groundwater Authority the Inclusive Groundwater Authority Joint Technical Advisory Committee, member of the Groundwater Resource Association, which has a lot of discussion about water rights. And then Pacific Gold Agriculture itself has been actively involved, submitting many comments to the board, to a variety of the groundwater sustainability agencies in the Sacramento Valley for the last 5-6 years. So most of my recent experience has been my role as a managing principal of Pacific Gold Agriculture.
Do you have any education or advanced degree relating to water quality?
I don't have an advanced degree remaining to water quality. No, I don't. But as I mentioned, I have extensive and been involved in from both my role at the Almond Board, but also my involvement in the Groundwater Association, also involvement in water recharge project. I'm a co-author on a groundwater on-farm recharge project in Kern County that focus on potential water contamination from recharge, specifically nitrates. Professor Helen Dalka was part of that effort, but I'm a listed co-author on a paper. Also, I've taken several classes from Dr. Harder at UC Davis. He offers seminars on water itself, including water quality. I think I'm probably more focused on water quality than probably anybody else in the Sacramento Valley. And I'll make that statement.
Thank you.
Groundwater quality, I'd say. Groundwater.
Mr. Woolridge, we're done with 67A. Mr. King, you've claimed that you have water and property interests that could be affected by the sites project. Is that correct?
Yes.
Would you agree with the characterization that you have a personal economic interest at stake in this proceeding?
Yeah.
Your personal interest in these issues in this proceeding diminishes your ability to provide objective expert testimony. Isn't that correct?
Not in my case. I'm known as a person who's a general interest person. My economic interest at this point just relates to the preservation of 265 acres of wetlands, 20 of which is in the canal and riparian. All I have economically now is the residual value of that land subject to the easement. I think my interest is coincident with public trust, with the best interest for the welfare of the environment and welfare of the county of origin, Colusa County. So I don't believe I'm a person generally motivated by economics. And that's probably one reason why I'm protesting this, because I believe in the future sustainability and of the environment and just economic environmental justice issues as it relates to Colusa Trough.
Can we please bring up King 68? This is a copy of your submitted testimony, correct? Can we please scroll to section A under paragraph 2? Thank you. Here you reference the flow of Funk's Creek, correct?
I said correct, yes.
Thank you. Did you review site's water availability analysis?
I did, yes.
And site's water availability analysis does consider and analyze Funk's Creek flows, correct?
Yes.
Do you dispute the adequacy of site's analysis?
Yes,
I apologize, I didn't hear you. Did you say yes?
I do.
And have you conducted your own analysis of Funk's Creek's flows?
Relying on USGS research, yes.
Can you please describe the analysis you performed using USGS research?
I've examined several USGS papers, but I think most applicable, and this is where I was going to go with Dr. Davids before I ran out of time, would be the discussion of water availability for the Cortina Reservoir. And I believe probably most informative is, so it's King 36, if you're interested. And if you page 10 of that talks about the ability for stored water from using the ephemeral streams on the west side of the Sacramento Valley, and did a statistical analysis with the R squared of 92 and came up with analysis for the potential water coming out of Funk's Creek. And it basically assumes about 3.2 inches per acre for the watershed. And I believe that I don't have the exact numbers before, but I believe that the sites analysis is understating the average flows of Funks Creek by probably a factor of 3. But I refer to the equation on that, and then they compare that versus. And also, I don't believe that MBK nor Dr. Davids actually looked at
Mr.
this.
King, this is now outside the scope of my question about your analysis. So
Okay.
I'm going to move on to section A at paragraphs 3 and 4. There you discuss impacts to property rights, correct?
Can you go back? Let me section 3 and
Paragraphs-
4. Yeah.
Yes.
Section 8, 3 and 4. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. You talking about yeah, okay. I got it.
Do you claim to own fee simple title to any portion of the Calusa Basin drain?
Yes.
You didn't submit any documentation of title in your direct case in chief exhibits, did you?
I think I might have in the Spring Valley Recharge Project. We have the site, and it shows us owning half of the drain for about a mile, and then a whole part of the drain, section 20, Township 14 North, Range 1 West. We owned all, the family historically has owned the whole land adjacent, but a few years ago I sold half of it to a neighbor. But there's a portion of it in section 20 right south of the Han Road Bridge that we own both sides, and it's totally fee simple. Yeah. And that's, I believe, if you look at the sites, the Spring Valley Recharge Project and the maps for that, and then also the wetland reserve, the NRCS document regarding the wetland reserve. That plan may also denote my ownership of the drain itself. That's kind of a main point, is that you're denying water to our property, and we want to keep those trees alive and all the fish and everything in that channel alive.
Okay, I would move to strike that last comment as non-responsive.
Affirmed. We'll strike that.
Mr. King, you did not submit documentation of any claimed appropriative or riparian water right on the Calusa Basin drain in your direct case in chief exhibits, did you?
I am not sure, but my understanding was that I did specifically in the protests, and that my conversation with presiding officer Kenzie is that I believe that the protest should be part of the evidentiary record, and I specifically went into those water rights in the protests. That was my expectation. When we protested, we had no expectation that this would be subject to a proceeding like the AOHO, but it was actually going to be a hearing before the water board. So we will strongly advocate for the inclusion of our protests, where I go in great length and detail about our water rights.
Did you submit documentation of any alleged injury or interference with your claimed title or rights?
Yes, I submitted in exhibits where I included pictures of the flows of the Calusa Basin drain in May 14th, 2024. I specifically document the injury from flows, from the restriction of the natural flows, but also my anticipation of continued injury because of how the Davis Weir has been operated by GCID.
Those alleged injuries don't reflect the operation of Site's reservoir, do they?
No, but they reflect the contractual arrangements that Sites has with Glen Calusa Irrigation District and Maxwell Irrigation District, and their ultra-virus use of the easement granted to them under through the 5-party agreement. So our expectation is that the Glenn-Clues Irrigation District and Maxwell Irrigation District will continue to use the easement granted to them in an ultra-biased way, which will continue to harm us. And it's the same issue that was before the board in 1950.
Can we please look at paragraph 3 under section B? This is on PDF page 3. Thank you. And starting at line 7, Mr. King, you state that sites is likely to raise the value of water in the whole Calusa subbasin when in-basin groundwater trading is implemented or using groundwater substitution because there will be a substantial economic incentive to sell all sites water and pump groundwater. Do you see that? You don't cite any evidence to support this statement, correct?
Cite evidence to support this statement. To the extent that I don't, but I believe it's part of the state water plan and the proposals of the California Water Commission for groundwater trading. I would refer you to the California Water Commission document in May 2022, a state role in supporting groundwater trading with safeguards for vulnerable users, findings and next steps. The California Water Commission has had hearings about that, and to the extent that it's part of the state water plan and all the other documents and AHOs, it's part of the evidence because it's implicit in that and implicit with along the conjunctive use priorities of the state for the Sacramento Valley.
Did you prepare any economic analysis yourself that supports that statement?
I'm familiar with economic analysis around using groundwater for agricultural use rather than using surface water.
Mr. King, I apologize for cutting you off, but I'm looking for a yes or no.
Well, I have generally looked at that economic analysis, and I did it regarding the paper that I was co-author with regarding on-farm recharge in Kern County. So I have done that economic analysis myself as part of a co-author.
You also state in paragraph 3 that sites is likely to raise the value of water in the whole Calusa subbasin when in-basin groundwater trading is implemented or using groundwater substitution because the site's water market will be interconnected with water transfers by settlement contractors. Do you see that? And again, did you include a citation in your written testimony that supports that statement?
No.
Okay. You state in paragraph 3 in the last sentence that landowners who benefit from Stone Corral and Funk's Creek flows for recharge or winter irrigation will have a net loss of available water. Do you see that? Did you review the site's analysis of whether the partial assignment and petitions for release of priority would deprive the counties in which the water originates of water necessary for their development? And do you recall the conclusion by sites that the project would not deprive Calusa County of its current or projected water needs?
Disagree with it.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
I disagree with that. There's a lot, the assumptions behind that from Dr. Davids, and then also the biologists. We also talked about assumptions. It's all based on assumptions, which I disagree with.
Did you perform a water availability analysis to support your statement about a net loss of available water?
So, I mean, I just did it in my opening statement. I believe there's 125,000 on average, 125,000 acre feet that is potentially withheld, is partly withheld north of Davis Weir.
Okay, in section C under paragraph 1, you state that the sites, excuse me, can we scroll to section C, paragraph 1? Thank you. Here you state that the site's operations plan will create an ecological dead zone from the Davis Weir Dam to the Ballston Dam because there's no provision to maintain flows for beneficial in-stream rights and riparian habitat. Do you see that? And is the reach of the Colusa Basin drain from the Davis Weir Dam to the Baldston Dam is it natural or man-made?
Natural.
And what do you mean by the term ecological dead zone?
It's a place where fish and other animals like turtles and die, and where trees get cut down by beavers because they're trying to preserve themselves. It's a place where if that water doesn't come through, the riparian habitat will diminish, and the nature and the natural environment will degrade over time.
Is it your position that there is currently an ecological dead zone from the Davis Weir Dam to the Baldston Dam?
Times.
I do apologize. It's not your fault, but it is cutting out. Did you say yes?
Yes, at times I'd say like May of this year. One of my exhibits has me holding a dead fish that I found just south of actually in the Davis Weir Bladder Dam, and we've experienced dead turtles in May of this year. Beavers cutting down willow trees, trying to preserve themselves in May of this year because there weren't flows for 10 days. And also in August of 2022, in our protest, we included photos, but I also included photos of all the no flows in the Colusa Basin drain, taken from the middle of Colusa Basin drain in May of this year.
Are you aware that the sites project does not involve conveying any sites project water via the Colusa Basin drain in the reach upstream of Davis Weir Dam, and the reach between Davis Weir Dam and the Baldston Dam?
Can you say that again?
Yes. Are you aware that the sites project does not involve conveying any sites project water via the Colusa Basin drain in the reach upstream of Davis Weir Dam and in the reach between Davis Weir Dam and Baldston Dam?
No, it doesn't include anything from the Davis Weir Dam to Balsam Dam, but I know that sites water is going to be released to the refuges, to Colusa National Wildlife Refuge and Delavan, which would by necessity need to be in the Colusa Basin drain. That's not very developed in the May operations plan, but there are provisions for releases for the refuges, and that water is going to be commingled with Sacramento River water and then reuse water and any natural water.
In paragraph 2 of section C of your testimony, you state that the final EIR EIS doesn't address hexavalent chromium. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is it your position that Sites Reservoir will increase the amount of hexavalent chromium in the environment?
Yes.
And what's the source of that hexavalent chromium?
The two papers, the two papers that I mentioned, the first paper, generation chromium 6 or hexavalent chromium generation of aldose zones of alluvial sediments in the southwestern Sacramento Valley.
Mr. King, to clarify, I'm asking what is the source from the operation of Sites Reservoir that will be responsible for increasing the amount of hexavalent chromium in the environment?
Right. The watershed around the reservoir contains a lot of serpentine rock, which is volcanic in nature. That rock is some of the chemical constituents of that rock are manganese and chromium and nickel. And as the serpentine rock weathers, the sediment actually moves down the watershed. And since Sites Reservoir will be the depository for that water from the watershed, you'll have both chromium. You'll have that sediment in there, and that'll be the source of that. We also documented in Bergstresser's 1968 report that 4 springs in the area actually had chromium in its effluent. So it's possible that there may be one of those or other springs that actually have chromium in its effluent. Otherwise, also what's unique about the area, the soils of Colusa County, because of the serpentine parent material, we do have historically, during the 10,000 years of alluvial fans, deposits of manganese and chromium in the soil, and that's what Dr. Morrison points out that's unique to our area. And what happens is once you have groundwater recharge in slightly acidic 6 to 7 pHs, chromium 3, the trivalent form chromium 3 is mobile, but then if it moves out of the Valdose zone, our soils tend to be more alkali, and that's when you have this redox related oxidation of the hexavalent form chromium. And that's why it's observed in, let's say, water in Putah Creek, quite a bit of it in the Yellow Subbasin, why Dunnigan water supply has hexavalent form of chromium, why Willows
I'm
has
sorry,
hexavalent.
I'm starting to lose you, Mr. King.
I'm sorry.
A
Why
little slower.
the Dunnigan Water Supply District has high levels, one of the highest levels of the state of the hexavalent form of chromium. Willow's water supply system does, and so and it is observed in the yellow groundwater sustainability plan. There's a part of its mention is hexavalent form of chromium. One of the highest recorded levels of hexavalent form of chromium actually was at the Superfund site in Davis, where they observed a 500 parts per billion.
Mr. King, I
Yep.
apologize for cutting you off, but I think we're outside the scope of my question.
Okay.
Just to confirm, those are all existing conditions in the environment currently, correct?
Yes, but recharge, the reservoir itself will have recharge to its adjacent footprint, and any conveyance of water with a touch of soil will add to recharge. So the Coosa Basin drain and the footprint of the reservoir itself will have this potential for the generation of hexavalent form of chromium, and then any transport of water through any of the faults in the area, which may go or may not go to a public supply system, but any movement of water that actually that touches or saturates soil with manganese and chromium, the chromium trivalent form of chromium has potential for the generation of the hexavalent form of chromium.
In paragraph 3 of section C, if we can scroll down a little bit. Thank you. You reference a discussion in the cited USBR environmental assessment regarding the salt problem at the Davis Weir, correct?
Correct.
And the sites project is not the cause of any current or past salt problems at the Davis Weir, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Since the sites project would convey sites project water in the Coosa Basin drain many miles downstream of the Davis Weir, the sites project would have no effect on any purported salt problem at the Davis Weir, would it?
No, I disagree with that. The Davis Weir acts as the backbone for the retention of water all the way up through the system, through its different laterals of it. And so by the use of the conveyance, the GCID conveyance, the TRR North, it incorporates, it's all that water is commingled. And it'd be a backbone of the use of the GCID conveyance structure.
In paragraphs 5 and 6 of section C of your testimony on PDF page 4, thank you. You only reference existing or historical water quality conditions, isn't that correct?
As reported by the US EPA, yes.
Okay. And starting with paragraph 5 of section C on this page, through the remainder of your testimony ending on page 7, you do not reference the sites project in those 3 pages of written testimony, is that correct?
No, yes, you're correct.
Those are all the questions I have. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chester. I think Mr. Soderlund already indicated he did not have questions. Ms. Aufdenberg, do you have any questions for Mr. King?
No, we do not. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Mendel Rice?
State Water Contractors does not have questions for Mr. King. Thank you.
I think with that, I don't have additional questions at this time. Normally we allow for redirect, which here you're not represented by the attorney, so it's a little odd. And I want to make sure we stay within the bounds, but what I will allow is if you have one or two points of clarification within the scope of the cross-examination questions that Ms. Chester asked you. You may make those now. Will be a self-correct.
Well, we're 17 minutes before noon, so I'm gonna say thank you for the time.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Mr. King. And then with that, I will say thank you for your testimony. I appreciate it. And I will look to the larger room here. I don't know how long it'll take. I sort of hesitate. Maybe we should start the conversation about how to deal with evidentiary objections, because maybe we'll resolve it fast and then we can be done. And take a break for lunch. I mean, not a break, but finish our hearing day. Looking forward, I also wanted to take a look at our schedule. We have what I'm calling a bye week next week, and then we have witnesses from the South Delta water users, and we should probably talk about how that ordering would go. And then we also have on the 21st, an additional witness, Mr. Asarian, and I believe, is it Mr. Asarian and company, as well. And then we have November 4th, with additional witnesses. So I think we should talk schedule, and then I think we should talk about the timing of evidentiary objections, because what I'm thinking is we may have some time in that remaining week in October when we're meeting. And if we do, I'm considering whether if we end up having time, it may make sense to address at least the authorities exhibits, since we have, other than any cross-exam that may come in at the end, very end, we have everything. With that, I will turn to you, Mr. Hitchings.
Yes, thank you. I just emailed to the AHO office and to the parties proposed schedule that we might want to discuss or consider for the submittal of written evidentiary objections and responses. We put that together just in light of your comments yesterday, so we put that together as quickly as we could, but it might be that it's worth giving folks a little time. I'll just summarize what our suggestion was. I think it's consistent with what you just stated, but in order to maybe get a start on some of the objections for the cases in chief that have been submitted or about to be done, we were proposing that objections to the site's project authority testimony and evidence, as well as the coordinating NGOs and tribal parties, with the exception of Dr. Rosenfield, that they would be submitted by October 25th. Also objections to T&M King Farms, since that case in chief is concluded. And then responses to those objections due a week later on November 1st. And then assuming that the South Delta parties' testimony and evidence is concluded, or whatever of it is, objections to that due November 1st. And then a week later, responses to objections to South Delta parties' testimony and evidence, and objections to Dr. Rosenfeld and Clark Ornbon's testimony and evidence. So the idea here is to kind of do it on a staggered basis, so that I think it may help your office as far as the volume of written evidentiary objections that are coming in, and it is based upon what's concluded and what is about to be concluded. And so, and then finally, the responses to objections to Dr. Rosenfield and Mr. Ornbon, that could be the 15th. We kind of throw that out as at least a schedule that we thought would start to make sense. The idea was also to allow enough time in between to allow you to address those objections sufficiently in advance of when the rebuttal testimony deadline is, and it may be that you'd be able to make rulings on some of the objections in batches based upon what's submitted earlier versus later.
Thank you, Mr. Hitchings, and thank you for putting together that proposal. It sounds like seems quite helpful. What I'd suggest is that we go ahead and take a break for lunch so that everyone can look at it. I think that's what you were suggesting too, and then we could reconvene and have a further discussion. And also I can take a look at it. Mr. Busher, did you have something to add?
I just have one question, and I was on the YouTube, so I apologize if I missed this. For the evidence presented, for example, by the site's authority, right, for the exhibits that the witnesses testified about, I understand, right, you're proposing to move all of that into evidence, I would assume. For the documents that were used on cross-examination, I didn't know if any of those were being entered, and I think it would be at least potentially helpful to have, right, a list of the documents that are being moved in, so that we know what it is, right? Everybody's on the same page as what should or should not be objected to. And so I didn't know if that was part of the contemplation in this schedule, that you could provide that, or, right, it's everything that the witness is authenticated on direct and none of the cross stuff, to just limit that or narrow that down. That would be helpful.
Yeah, would want to go through that actually, and I presume the opposite, but we'll see what each of the parties tries to do. But in my experience, parties typically will move cross-examined exhibits into the or offer them into the evidentiary record. But the point is well taken that we need to have a shared understanding of what is being offered. So maybe that's something we could do. We could either do it orally, but maybe it makes more sense. Normally we do all of this orally with respect to moving exhibits into the evidentiary record. And now that I'm thinking about it, I don't know why. It maybe makes more sense. I mean, we can do it all on the papers. So we could set an earlier deadline, before evidentiary objections are due, that we have some written articulation of what our understanding is about which exhibits are coming into the record. It's also helpful when there are errata versions of testimony to make sure we're getting the right ones in. And we would each articulate those. To some extent, the exhibit indices are helpful, that we have the parties or the AHO is maintained on the FTP site. But maybe we can incorporate that in. Mr. King, did you have a comment or a question?
So I just took a quick look at the proposal. The 25th is become a little problematic to me. I'm going to be out for the beginning of that week. If we can have some more time regarding mine, push it out for the next week, I appreciate it. But also just, I do think the oral discussion is a good way to handle this. It might be my preference, rather than have to do some more writing and do all that. But maybe a combination of the two. But to me, it's just really a matter of what do you think is fair and what's within the scope of this. But anyhow, I'd like oral, but also I'd like to have a little bit more time.
Great, thanks, Mr. King.
Yeah, I would also note on that our case in chief has been concluded since September 30th. So I think there's been some additional time built in. We knew that this was coming as far as needing to address evidentiary objections, and we're not asking that objections to our case in chief be accelerated earlier than when our objections are due to the bulk of the protestants that have almost concluded their cases in chief.
Noted. And I'm not we'll have a chance to talk about this after lunch, because I do want to make sure that we all have time to look at this and think about it. Is there anything else we should discuss before we break for lunch, take a look at this proposal, and reconvene? Because we need the time, I'd suggest we just reconvene at 1 o'clock. Make it nice and round number. Any concerns with that approach?
Yeah, hearing officer Kenzie, I had one other issue I wanted to raise procedurally.
Please.
And this relates to the email exchange with the Paskenta tribe and Chairman Bill. We just noted that that there seemed to be in the email response from you indicated that evidence submitted and accepted during the rebuttal phase of the hearing will be considered by the board in the same manner as evidence submitted during the case in chief, and we were concerned that may imply that they wouldn't be held to the rebuttal procedures that are in the hearing notice, which require that rebuttal evidence is new evidence to rebut evidence another party has presented. So we just wanted to make sure there wasn't that implication or intention to depart from the noticed procedures on rebuttal evidence.
But thank you, Mr. Hitchings. And that probably, yeah, that was I think a somewhat ambiguous. My intent there, as you might surmise, was to clarify that evidence is, to some extent, evidence is evidence. It comes into the record, and there's not a sort of, the weight of the evidence is no less once it's in the record. I did not intend that to refer to the scope of allowable evidence on the rebuttal phase. I don't want to, the Pescenta band, since they're not represented here at the moment, could make a motion and attempt to submit evidence outside of the limitations on rebuttal evidence, and then you would have a chance to object, and I'd have to consider that motion. But that certainly wasn't my intent in the email. Was to, I guess the default is that the normal rules applicable to rebuttal evidence would apply to the evidence submitted by all the parties, including the Pescenta band.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Are there other questions we should address? All right, let's go ahead and break until 1 o'clock. Please, and thank you for your patience in allowing us to get back together on this, the evidentiary objections. And please be prepared to log back into the Zoom, and I will see you then.
Thank you.
Thank you.